Welcome, everybody, and welcome, George Williams, and thanks for accepting our invitation. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. It's great to be here.
So we have people from all over around, and George doesn't need any introduction. I think everybody knows him, but I'm just going to say that he has dedicated his life to horses as a rider, as a coach, as a clinician. He has served in many committees. He rode and trained with Temple Farms for, I guess, more than 20 years. And he was a very successful competitor as well. He was fifth in the 2003 World Cup in Sweden and team bronze in Aachen in 2005. And he won many times USDF Grand Prix and Grand Prix Freestyle Horse of the Year. And now he serves in the FEI Dressage Committee. And of course, he has an amazing performance with the young riders in the US. So, George, thank you very much for accepting this invitation and for being with us. So I would start by asking you, now that you're teaching juniors and children and young riders, how did you start? How was the beginning? Did you start at a young age or did you start later?
No, I started as a young age. I came up through the pony club system in the United States. And through that, of course, with our pony clubs, the older kids taught the younger kids. So I got some experience teaching fairly young in my teenage years. I knew as a teenager that this is what I wanted to do professionally. So I sort of continued in that mark. I went on to be this sort of typical story. I was a working student for a couple of years, and then found a job training at Temple Farms, as you mentioned, and have always been interested in teaching and teaching youth. And probably think I coached my first young rider in the to the young rider North American Young Rider Championships at that time in the around 1990. So coaching young riders at the FEI Young Rider level for now about almost 30 years, I guess.
So, well, we have people from many federations from Latin America and from the US. And now that you mentioned that you started from the pony club, you came out of the pony club system. Could you explain to us a little bit how that system works and whether or not you think it's beneficial? How is it good for the sport? What are your thoughts about pony club?
Well, for me, from a personal perspective, pony club was really pretty much the center of my life as a youngster. It not only from the riding point of view, but it was also the center of my social life, if you will. So it became a very important part of my whole life and the way I looked at things. I think the pony club system, in those days, we did a little bit of eventing. We had to do the dressage, cross country, and show jumping, which I think was a very good introduction for a young person. We really had a lot of fun with the horses. We enjoyed that, but the education that we received was also, I think, quite good. They support it with a very good horsemanship, horse mastership type program with stable management and the care of the horses. So for me, it seemed like a very good education. And I think it's we all know that riding can be a very individual sport. We compete as individuals, really, even if we're part of a team. So I think that at least in the United States, too, we're also, as young people, you're frequently in a stable by yourself as the only young person, I should say, and with more older riders. So it was great to have peers and friends of that age, friends in that age group that are all interested in the same thing. So I think it's a very good experience. I can't say enough.
Because I think we miss that part in Central and South America. And I think it's very important because you hear that all over around Europe and North America, I think pony clubs have played a very important role in the sport, in the development of the sport.
Yes, and a number of the kids that I was in Pony Club with them, a number of them continued in the profession, and went on to do things. So it definitely played a very valuable role uh, in our careers.
Okay, so let's start talking about the children. Uh, when do you think is the right age to start training with the children for competitive dressage, and how do you handle that part?
I think that the FEI level of, the FEI children's division is really quite telling in the 12 to 14-year-old age bracket. I think riding prior to that is very, very good. And certainly there are some kids that are going to like dressage early on. But I do think it's important to get sort of a well-rounded background in horses if possible. So I don't want to see them specialize too early on, but I think at 12, it fits right in with the FI Children's. I think that's very appropriate. Certainly with our daughter, she started competing a little bit younger than that. And so I think that sort of depends on the individual child. But, dressage does take a certain amount of discipline, and not all children have that naturally, shall we say, or so inclined. And so sometimes as they get a little older, they become more interested in it.
Okay, we now have up to 30 something participants covering many different areas of the world. Then my next question would be, and if anybody has a question, you can send me a text through the chat of the Zoom, and then I will ask the question to George. So going back to the children, when I'm sitting at the judge's booth, especially in Europe, you sit there and some of these kids, the children, look like, like an Edward Galt in a small proportion, but riding so beautifully and so professional. And you can tell that must take a lot of tough training.
Yeah.
And then my question would be, how do you handle as a trainer being tough and at the same time having a lot of people, especially from psychological point of view, saying, well, but kids must have fun, and you cannot be very tough with them because otherwise they will go away from the sport. What's your approach to that?
Well, I think it's, again, I stress that they need to be well-rounded. I think that they certainly can take it very seriously and be very good at it and disciplined and with the practice. But I also would be careful that we don't burn out the kids. In the United States, with the United States Olympic Committee, they have a program called the Athlete Development Program. And in that, they really encourage young people to have more than one sport, to make sure it is fun, because what you want to make certain is that the child that goes into this really wants to do it for their whole life and not burn out as a teenager or burn out early on. But you really want them to just fall in love with dressage and with horses and the whole experience. So I think that it's important to balance that.
I've been to some shows in Central America, and they're forcing the kids show like our training level tests, but they ride with side reins. And I found that very complicated, especially when you have to judge like the stretching, and sometimes the horses are just running around with no connection with the kid, having no feeling. Have you had any experience with this in the US, and what solution have you come out with? How
Yeah,
you start showing?
right. So in the United States, we don't allow that in our competitions. We have rules against that. I do know that a lot of countries use it for their competition for their younger people. I think the concept of making sure that the horse is under control, that they get the right feel of how a horse should move under them, the carriage a horse should have, is probably the thinking behind it. I am not a person who's a strong believer in side reins for any of the training. So I sort of innately don't really like the idea. But I certainly understand where it's coming from and why it's being used. But I really think that I would rather see, I think the part of it, I'd rather see them learn how to ride and have the correct contact and the connection. I think some of it, of course, is being done to protect the horses so they're not being jerked on or with too rough of hands. But I think that's part of our job as teachers to make sure that the students really understand contact and soft hands and how to be polite to the horse in that manner.
I totally agree with you, and I asked the question because we all know that there are different approaches, but just to see the horses just with the connection on the side reins and the kid not getting the feeling or the idea of the connection, I don't think is the right approach. But thanks for your answer. The other question I want to ask you, at this, we've had this problem in Colombia. And I'm sure it's very similar in other Latin American countries, and is whether or not we should use the FEI tests for our children, because sometimes you think, well, if I introduce the FEI tests, then they're too difficult for our kids, and if they're too difficult, then they will not come to the shows. But then at the same time, there's other people that said, okay, we have to be competitive. And if we, don't push a little and make the trainers work with them to reach that FEI children level, then they will never make it to juniors and young riders. What are your thoughts about it?
I think it's really going to depend on the situation in each country. For us in the United States, we have lower level tests. We have training level, referred to as training level, first level, second level, and so on. The FEI children's test is sort of between first and second level. We officially say it's more comparable to second level. So we do offer tests of a lower difficulty for children if they want to do it. For our national championships, we use the FEI children's test. I think, it's not the correct test maybe to start a young child with, but it's certainly at that age bracket, they can be very capable of riding that test. And I think the test offers a lot of good things in it, in that it emphasizes simple changes, it emphasizes some of the very basic things that really help to develop a rider in the long run. I do think also, while we're talking about that, in 2020, in January 1st of this year, the FEI changed the system on how the children's test is judged. It now has a quality marking score as well as a technical score. And I think that is a very important step. And once everybody understands the system and how it works, and the judges are all on the same page on how they're going to handle the quality mark, I think that's going to prove to be very, very beneficial. And that's really the idea behind that, is to ensure that the riding, the skills of the rider are judged and not so much the horse. And so the quality mark is about the rider and their use of aids and their seat and whatnot.
Yeah, I do agree that was a very important step from the FEI. I think we the judges have to learn a lot. Yes. How to market properly. Exactly. But I'm sure the FEI will do some seminars about that, because I think it's very, very important, especially to reward good riding.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
One question is, what do you think about children learning to ride bareback before they use a saddle? And I would add, what do you think about vaulting as a starting point for dressage?
I think vaulting and bareback riding is all very good for developing the balance and sort of the athletic ability, especially vaulting, of course, and is much more of a controlled format, shall we say. And for developing coordination, balance, as I said, and just the comfort level of being on the horse. I think riding bareback can be very good as well. I do think, you have to make certain that the position that you learn to sort of hang on to riding bareback is not necessarily the same position you're going to have in the saddle, but it does have benefits. There's no doubt. Just some of it just being the comfort level of being on the horse.
I have another question from one of our participants, and she's saying that in Europe, you usually see all the kids learn how to ride with ponies.
Yeah.
And in Latin America, especially, we don't have too many ponies. So what do you think about the kids learning in ponies as to learning in big horses? What would your preference be?
I think it's good for the mount, the horse or the pony, to be of a suitable size for the rider. I think that's probably the most important aspect. Here again in the United States, we initially, in trying to bring more youth into the sport, we introduced ponies as a first step, and then a few years later introduced the children's division. And I think for us, that was a bit of a mistake. I think that to bring as many people into the sport, young people into the sport as possible, outside of Europe with the FEI, we're allowed to use horses. Use horses and ponies in the FEI Children's Division. Within Europe, it's limited to just horses. So for us, those of us that are outside of Europe, it's really beneficial because the child can ride whatever is available, whether it's their mother's horse or an older sister's pony. It doesn't really matter, or a younger sister's pony. So I think for me, the biggest thing is really trying to get more youth into our sport, to get them more involved, and of course, to keep it interesting, and not to make it so difficult or so limiting that we in a sense, scare them away or keep them away from it.
Okay, I have another question from Bolivia. They're saying that they're using the FEI test, but they've been thinking about using the USDF test.
Mm-hmm.
And then their question is, if you think that it is appropriate to start with the USDF test rather than the FEI, or to offer both.
I would recommend offering both. Of course, I'm a little bit prejudiced. I have, for years, as you mentioned, I've been involved on a volunteer basis with a lot of our organizations. So for years, was a member of our test writing committees. I think the tests are very well thought out. They've been proven over the years. Some of the tests we have revised, they get sort of adjusted as we go. But I think the USDF tests, which are done in conjunction with U.S. Equestrian Federation, are really valuable tests and very good, good to use. So I would recommend using both.
Yeah, and I would add, if you allow me, many years ago in Colombia, we used to make our own tests.
Yeah.
And we reached a point where we said, well, the Americans are doing it so well, and we requested permission to the USDF, and I know the same Mexico did, and
Mm-hmm.
many other countries. So like we all the judges, when we go judging around Latin America and Central America, you'll find that they're using the FEI test, of course, the USDF tests. Of course, you have to request permission, because
Right.
I know the same thing happens in Canada, but there are already many translations into Spanish, so it's not even that difficult. But it is important that because of copyrights, we request permission from USDF.
Exactly, yes. Yeah.
Okay, so I have more questions. How do you handle the resistance of children when they feel comfortable in certain basics and don't want to get out of the comfort zone?
That's an excellent question. I think it is so important as an instructor or a coach to know how much you can push, to push them out of their comfort zone. I always say you have to push them just like training a horse. You push it slightly to the edge of their comfort zone, but you don't want to push them over the edge. Right? So you really have to have a sense of how much can you push, and obviously do it in small degrees so that you build up to it. But that is part of what we have to do as coaches is try to push a little more and get them to up their level of performance. But it takes good judgment, right? And really being able to read your student. I
thought that was a very good question, and then I would ask the same question, but now would you do that? Would your answer be the same for juniors and young riders?
Yes, and for adult amateurs, all the way. I think it's for whatever student you have. Yeah, yeah. It's always learn knowing how much can you push and when you have to back off, and listening to them. Right, you have to really listen to what not only what they're saying, but also to their body language. And I have to say, one of the things I love now about the teaching via radio, headsets to the student, is you can hear their breathing. And you can tell when they're getting tense or when they're getting tired or when they're getting a little frustrated. And so they don't say anything, but I get a good sense of where they're at and how much, as I said, how much you can push and when you need to back off. Or maybe just congratulate them, encourage them in that sense. Yeah.
You know what? I think what you just mentioned is very important. With the headsets now, we can listen to the breathing, and that makes a big difference, because sometimes you don't realize how tired any rider is.
Exactly. No, exactly.
Children.
Yeah.
I have another question. I guess this one is from the US. It says, in children's FEI in the US, they're not using the CDI FEI quality equitation score yet at national shows. Is that expected to start soon? Also at a CDI, we do not offer children's A and B, which allows riders to earn more points at the CDI and move up the world ranking list. How do we get our shows to do the same as in Europe and other countries for these tests?
Yeah, so going back to the first question, we have, and hopefully it will happen, what we call our Festival of Champions, which is a national championship held outside of Chicago in August. And at that championship, we have FEI Children's, we have FEI Pony Rider, we have juniors, young riders, U25, and then all the young horse division. So it's a very large championship. We felt with the FEI Children's, because the new format for that test went into effect January 1st of 2020, that partly that our qualifying season had already started. So some riders may have tried to qualify under the old system with the test. But we also felt that the FEI judges maybe have a better sense of how to use it, but certainly our national level judges who we use for these qualifiers, it's totally new to them and they're not going to be on the same page. So we thought, in fairness to all the athletes trying out for the FEI Children's National Championship, that we would just use the technical score for 2020. We plan after for 2021 championships to use the new format, including the quality mark. I think at this point, in our championships, we just use, going back to the second part of the question, we just use the team tests and the individual tests for our championships. And so, of course, the CDIs really are probably just offering what, it's up to them to offer what they want to offer. We could maybe looking at what we're using at our championships, but that's how we started, and those are the tests we use. So I think the CDIs organizers are just responding to what our process is for our national championships.
Okay, that's very good.
Very small and just starting out. So, yeah.
I would like to move to another question. To me, there are two very important things when I go to horse shows. Of course, one is horse welfare, but then the other one is security as well for the riders. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you really see children riding horses that are definitely not fitted for children. So my question would be, what do you think is the right horse, the kind of horse that children need to ride? What's the appropriate horse for children today?
That's a good question. It has to have a good character, good temperament, good character. I think that is number one. I think it needs to be well balanced so that we don't have any of those issues of tripping and stumbling. And I would prefer to see them well trained, because I think it's very important that children learn, or from the start, you really learn what a trained horse feels like, so that as you get older and you start to train your own horse down the road, you really know the feelings that you're looking for, and how the horse should feel, how the horse should feel in balance, how the horse should go on its own. When I say go on its own, how it should be in front of the aids, how it should be responsive to the contact. So I think that the training is important. I agree with you. You sometimes see horses that are totally inappropriate for their riders, and at all levels, not just with children, but at all levels. And that is a big safety concern. But the other side of it too is that unfortunately the child is not really learning the right feeling, or they may become very discouraged, or they may become afraid. So it's not only can it be dangerous, but it also can just be very discouraging to them.
Thank you very much. I think that was very, very important. I have a question from a friend here that says, sometimes it's very difficult to explain to the parents the difference of the levels of training that their kids have in respect to the other kids that ride at the same place. Would you give any advice as to how to talk to the parents about that?
Boy, I think that you have to give be able to give the background on why, because there is a lot of competitiveness, obviously, in some of these situations between parents and between the kids. And it's important for the parents to realize or understand what level their child is at as a rider. And that in itself is sometimes misunderstood, because as I'm a parent, we're all very proud of our children. And it's sometimes very easy to think that your child is much better than they might really be. So there has to be a bit of a reality check sometimes. So you have to really sort of, I think, outline or discuss what the level is. I do think the quality of the horse comes into play in this. You have to be realistic, and you have to be honest about the quality of horse that they're on. It is a sport, of course, where the horse is a major part of it, whether they're cooperative and well-trained, but also, of course, the quality of the gaits and just the overall quality of the horse itself. So it's I just think you have to go through the different details on what separates the riders without bad mouthing the other one, and also not making the parent feel that their child is really not doing well or isn't up to the speed. So it's really, that's a tricky one. But I think it's a lot of what we have to do as coaches is in dealing with the parents.
Yeah. I think that's one of the most difficult parts, probably.
At times it can be, but I have to say most of the parents are wonderful. So it's yeah.
Okay, I have another question here. How do you identify and promote or support the development of young talented riders in the US? And what would you recommend to countries, to national federations, to do in order to support better their talented young riders?
So we have, thanks to an organization called Discover Dressage, they really help support and fund what we do with US Equestrian for the youth. So through that, we have a program we call the Emerging Athlete Program. And that is, right now we have, I think, 12 athletes in it, and it's our top youth athletes. They become members of the Emerging Athlete Program through performance indicators, so it's based mostly on scores. We also do what I would refer to as some talent scouting. I do clinics throughout the country. We do clinics in the US is broken into 9 different regions for the dressage. We do clinics in each region, and through those clinics, we also try to identify talent. But once they're in the Emerging Athlete Program, we offer some more intense training opportunities. We have what we call a high intensity training session in Gladstone, New Jersey, which was the headquarters for the US Equestrian Team for a number of years. We do that in the fall. With the emerging athletes right now, we do Zoom meetings every couple of weeks to try to sort of keep them informed. And through that, we also provide human physio help They have access to our senior team vet. So we try to provide that kind of support to them. We also use global analytics. I'm sure you're familiar with. They're the ones, David Strickland's program.
Yeah, that's
that does it. Yeah. So they have access to the global analytics program, and that's basically the most. and we have what we call one-on-one training, so that they can call or send. I can, if we're in the area, we coach them. We also do every 2 months video reviews of their riding and training. And that may be very short video if they want work or help with a half pirouette, or maybe one movement, or maybe a whole test. So, but that's how we try to help them the best we can.
Okay, now I want to move to a kind of difficult topic, but I think it's very important, and it's important to talk openly about it. And this concerns harassment. And I think that the US has made a big step ahead about it. But then at the same time, sometimes you talk to the trainers and they say like, I'm not going to train a minor, a children, or a junior again in my life because I'm scared of everything that comes with these harassment policies in place now. So what are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, I think it's obviously, I think the program is a very good program. I think it was needed, unfortunately. It's unfortunate there's a need for it, but unfortunately, that's just a fact of life. The program that U.S. Equestrian Federation does is really overseen, if you will, through the U.S. Olympic Paralympic Committee, which has sort of been their program is in place with a lot of pressure from the federal government. So it's a mandatory program, right, is the best way to put it.
Yes.
Yeah. So so the strictness of it is very strict, and there has been some controversy over it, but I think it in general it is good. I think a lot of it is just common sense. When I'm texting an athlete, and of course I'm dealing with a lot of youth, and for us 18 is the legal age for them. Anyone who's under 18, I definitely always include someone else on the text messaging. So you just common sense that way. As a coach, I would always have someone else with me when I'm, if we're traveling or driving somewhere. If you're at a show, you can't just take them from the hotel to the showgrounds. I can't take them in my car without someone else in the car. So it's a lot of I think those precautions are really very, very sensible. In the stable situation, of course, in teaching, it's good for a parent or a guardian to be there, some other person to be there to take part in not take part in the lesson, but to be a part of the program, especially for the parents to be a part of their child's program. So I think it's a set. I think there's mostly common sense things. And I think if you follow those, I feel fairly safe. I don't, in the sense that I don't think, you're going to set yourself up for a false accusation.
Good. And now that we have so many countries here, I think it would be a very important step for our countries to look at what the US is doing and what the FEI is doing regarding harassment. And we should all consider, implementing some important guidelines about it.
And I should stress that it's obviously the sexual harassment is a huge part of it, and that's really crucial. But it also includes bullying and other aspects of harassment. And from a coach's point of view of harassment, in the sense of one I always I shouldn't, but I sort of smile when I say is you can't deny them water if they need water. You can't withhold drinks until they do something. Those are things that it's mind-boggling that people ever thought that was something you would do anyway. But it covers all of those things as well. So it really protects the athletes on a number of levels.
Okay, I have a question here. One is, I think that in Colombia and Latin America in general, young riders are not becoming true horsemen.
Mm-hmm.
They usually ride at levels that they're not ready, with no focus on the true basics. What do you think of this, and how do you approach this with your students?
I think that this is a very serious concern in a lot of ways. And it's one of the conversations that we have in this country is that if they go through young riders, then the next thing you know, they're out there being professionals and moving on. And so I think that there are a number of things that have to be looked at. One, I think as a coach, you're also a teacher. Um, I think it's very important that in the lessons that we teach, that we give the principles, we give the background. Why do we do things? Why is a 20-meter circle important? Why does it have to be round, and what are the effects of it? And all of that needs to be taught to the kids, so that they do understand why they're doing what they're doing, and they do learn a little bit more about the training. I think it's good for them to be on horses, as I said earlier. It's good for them to be on horses that know a little bit, because then they develop the right feeling. But I think it's our job to also make certain that they learn that there's a lot more out there for them to learn about the sport and about the training training aspect, and also about the teaching and aspect of it as well. So, if they move from young riders to professionals, then I think it's very important that we try to have some sort of instructor certification program, so that they have to go through, so that they don't just think that because they did well at young riders, they then can go out and put a shingle up and suddenly be a professional. But going back to it, I do think it's our responsibility as the teachers, as the coaches, to make sure that we give them the best education we can.
Okay, I have another question. What would you recommend as being good learning tools for children? Visual versus textual learning? What would you recommend, and what your
Sorry, say the last part again. What versus what? No,
visual
visual versus textual.
text? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the student, and then I think it's up to the instructor to really know how to reach that student, and in what manner does that student learn. So some people, as you know, are very visual, and that they learn that way. Others can read it and they understand it immediately, or can do it from reading it. So I think it's important to know how a student learns. I think this sort of brings up the implicit learning versus explicit learning too, in that there comes a time you try to explain things, you try to help them through it, but there are also times you have to let them make mistakes and let them figure it out for themselves, and to be able to sit back and let them make a few little mistakes and learn, or take the chance of making a mistake. They don't have to necessarily make the mistake, but take the chance of making a mistake, so they really learn in both manners, and into being told what to do and how to do it, but also getting the feedback from the horse and learning from the horse.
Before we go on to juniors,
Yes.
but you mentioned a very important thing, and that was about trainers. And I know the US has a program to certify trainers. In
Right.
Central and South America, some countries have tried to do it. I think most of them unsuccessfully. Could you explain to us, because probably you had the same problem at the beginning in the US, because many people believe like, I know everything, so I don't need to go through any certification program. So how was your process of implementing it? And what would you recommend to our countries to implement a good trainers program?
I think it's a very, very difficult, and I'm actually involved in a project looking at how to make it even a better program in reaching more people, because it is not mandatory here to be certified to instruct. So that's really, I was going to say it's an obstacle, but so we have to come up with ways to give it meaning and add value to being a certified instructor. And the program has been in existence about 30 years, I think. In the last few years, it's moved to the FEI level of certification. But there's a lot more work that needs to be done, because I'm just going to throw it out. I think we might reach about half of the professionals out there at maximum, if even that, to be certified. So we're not satisfied with where it's at. We want to make it better still, and still trying to reach younger people through it.
Okay, so now I'm going to move to junior level.
Yes.
So obviously this is, the level is much more demanding. So I would like to ask the same question as for the children. What would be an appropriate horse for a junior so the junior doesn't get discouraged and doesn't, decides to quit or something?
Yeah, I think the world in general is getting more and more competitive. So the horse has to have good gaits, has to basically be a good horse to start with. It has to have correct gaits. When I say good gaits, it has to have correct gaits. Again, I think it has to be athletic and trainable. And it has to be of a quality where with the training and both the rider and the horse, that they are capable of a good performance. Because if you have a horse that's very kind of mediocre and has a very poor walk or a bad canter, say, it is a competitive world, so they're not going to do well when they compete. And I think to really stay in it, it has to be fun. And when we say it has to be fun, that the training process itself can be fun. The relationship with the horse can be fun, but it also is nice to know that you have at least a chance of doing well, and that makes it fun. So I do think the quality of horse is really important. How much training it has. Parents always kind of asking, is it a horse that will take them to young riders? And in general, I think that's always nice to have a horse that has the potential to move to young riders. And then you have some who say, well, will it be able to do young riders? And then will it be able to move to U25? Well, that's hard to say. And then, of course, the quality of the horse depends on it. And it can depend a lot on the amount that the parents are able to spend on the horse, and what the goals will be, and probably the interest. And what, the thing about teaching youth is that then, at least in the United States, then college education comes into play at a certain point, and horses may go on the back burner for a few years. So I think that those are things to look at. And at the age of the horse is important. In order to look at the age, you have to sort of have a sense of what your long-term goals are.
I'm going to make a very direct question now, because I've seen this. Many times you go and you're judging a junior level test that in our countries, at times, those junior level tests are written by amateurs or old people. We use the junior level test in Central and South America for our regional championships. Things like the Bolivarian Games are written under that level. Then my question would be, and sometimes I have to admit, then you see horses that are not able to perform one single flying change, not to the right, not to the left, not after the half pass, not nothing. So my question is, would you say that to go to junior level, you need to be able to perform flying changes both ways?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Good.
Absolutely. That's one of the first things. If you're trying a younger horse, that's one of the first things you want to know, because a flying change, the ability to flying change is important, and it's important to see before purchasing, I think in general, before purchasing a horse, if it's of an appropriate age to be doing the flying change. Because that's one of those things that can actually slow your training down for a year if the horse suddenly gets very discombobulated, right, or uncoordinated when it goes to try to change. So it can definitely change the length of the training period that you. Yeah.
Right. And then we talk about the difficulties of teaching children. Now I'd like to ask the same question about, because of the age of juniors. I mean, that's also a very difficult age because of the changes that these kids are going through. How do you handle that in terms of the training? And you have to travel with them to shows. Sometimes you go with them to Europe. I've seen you training in Europe with them. How do you handle all these, all these difficulties that come with those ages?
Well, having had a daughter that went through teenage years, you're sort of used to kind of what to expect. I think in that sense, there are a couple of things within that. Obviously, over time, physically they change quite a bit, and sometimes they keep on riding the same way, and sometimes they grow sudden growth spurt, and then the riding gets a little awkward for a bit. But again, I think that it's individual by individual. I try to give them their space as much as possible when we're in traveling in Europe, and trying to help them, allow them to find their way in that sense. I think they have to have their downtime, their quiet time, all of that or alone time. But again, each one is an individual, and I think it can be a great age to be around. I do think that some are less patient than others at that age. And I think, patience comes a lot with knowledge and experience in general. I think you get greater patience when you know how things work or don't work, or what the long-term plan is. So it's, sometimes you have to remind them that they have to be patient, or to remind them that the horses don't quite understand what the rider wants of them. But in general, to me, it's a fun age to work with. So I enjoy it.
Okay, you've had in the U.S. for many, many years, and I've had the pleasure to judge, probably in the last 8 years, your North American Youth Championships. And I think that has improved the level in the US and Canada tremendously. Could you explain to us a little bit how it works, and if you plan to implement any changes, and what are the benefits of that, to see if we could implement something similar down in South America, and what would you recommend to everybody around this kind of programs?
Yeah. So the North American, it's now called North American Youth Championships. It started out as the North American Young Rider Championships. It started in the 1980s. So it's been going for a lot of years. I think that the one thing that the FEI allows us to do, which has been really beneficial, is I mentioned that in the United States, we have 9 regions that we use for dressage. Each of those 9 regions can send a team. And Canada technically can send one from each province. And I think Mexico theoretically can send three teams. But it allows the countries to send more teams. So for us, that is really, really beneficial, because it means that we can have 40, whatever it is, 45, 40 riders, basically. 36, right? So do my math quickly. But it allows us to have more riders involved from around the country. And one of our biggest challenges is the size of our country, and be able to reach all the riders in different parts of the country. And to keep the whole country involved in the sport. So whether you're in the North Central, or you're East Coast or Southeast in Florida like I am now, or in California, by keeping everybody feeling that they're part of this is one of our challenges. So this is really, really beneficial to us. And it's surprising sometimes where our best riders come from, because they don't necessarily come out of what we would refer to as the hot spots for dressage. Sometimes they come from parts of the country that we don't necessarily think of. And I think that the NAYC has really helped us in developing that. So it is, for dressage, it's young rider level and the junior level. I think over the years, the quality has really improved, and it's very competitive. And we have a fairly extensive qualifying process to be chosen, for each rider to be chosen, athletes to be chosen from their regions. And that qualifying process has really become more difficult over the years. So to me, it is probably one of the most important competitions that we have. And to be able to, as I said, to include potentially that many competitors has been really helpful to this country. And a number of our top riders have come through that program.
Okay, yeah, I totally agree with you. That I was present at the last competition, and the quality has improved so much, and I think it has been very beneficial. So now we can move to young riders. So that's another big jump. What would you add? What comments would you add to the training of young riders? How different it is? What would your recommendations would be?
I think that the jump from junior rider to young rider is much larger than people really appreciate. At young rider, the junior level, of course, the test calls for collection, but in the young rider level, it really calls for a far greater degree of collection. And it was obviously the best example being the canter half pirouettes. And that developing and understanding that degree of collection is, I think, one of the biggest challenges that the riders have. And some riders, of course, sort of naturally have a sense of it, and other riders, it takes longer to develop that feel. And certainly in bringing the horses along, it's the same thing. Some horses are more naturally capable of collecting, and others it's a little bit more difficult. So for me, that's the biggest separation, is the degree of collection between the two.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, especially that individual test when you have to do the period exactly at X. That's
Yes.
that's one of the movements that give us a hard time, the judges.
But I think it's such an important movement because I always say dressage is a lot like jumping in the sense that you have to know when you're exactly 3 strides out, right? Where you're going to place something. So if you're coming to a half pirouette and it has to be at X, you have to know exactly when you're going to start to prepare the horse and to do the turn.
Yeah, definitely.
So, super.
Yeah. And then now we have the other big step, which is the under 25, where we're seeing kids doing all the Grand Prix movements in North America, and unfortunately not in South America, but in North America and Europe. And sometimes you see really amazing performances. So what are your recommendations for that new division?
I think we look at it in two different ways. I run the Emerging Athlete Program for Discovery Dressage and with the U.S. Equestrian Federation, and Charlotte Bridal is the developing coach for the next level of riders. So our U25 is a transition period. And when the very, very top ones will go into our developing program, and those would be the riders that we might take to Europe, the U25 riders that we might take to Europe. I think just as important is the riders they may be very talented riders, but their horses don't necessarily have quite the same natural ability, but to keep bringing those riders along. And we have a national championship for them. The amount of interest in it has grown incredibly over the years. A number of our young riders have continued to train their young rider horse into the U25 level. And as I said, sometimes maybe they're not the quality for us to think of it as being truly internationally competitive, especially in Europe. But we really want to keep those riders learning how to work with the piaffe and the passage and work with that level of the Grand Prix movements and become more and more comfortable with it. So if later on they do have the right horse that is truly international, then they have their homework's been done, right? They're ready to move on. So, as I said, we really have a lot of our young riders that are bringing their young rider horses into the U25 division, and it's great to see.
One thing that I found very interesting is that watching these North American youth championships over the years, when they go off the young riders, then years later you see them becoming trainers, professionals. So that's kind of a very interesting pyramid, of good riders, trainers. The whole idea is really good for the sport.
Yes. Oh, I think it's, a number of years ago, we had some comments that as a federation, we're spending too much on the youth championships. And I pointed out in an article years ago that a number of the instructors that these people were riding with actually came through those youth championships. It would have been the North American Young Rider Championships at the time, but they came through it, and you know, they're in their mid 40s or even 50 now, and they're you know, they are the ones that are teaching out. They're up there. They've become very good professionals, a lot of them, and it is such an important thing, and for the future of the sport, to have these competitions, to have competitions like that are. We consider them aspirational, right? They're motivational, they're aspirational, and then they get incredible experience from it. The other aspect that I meant to mention, and I think is crucial, is the team. The North American Youth Championships is a team competition, of course, and that team experience is really, really valuable. And as a rider, as a potentially a future senior competitor representing the United States in international competition, but also I think just as a citizen, as learning to get along with other people and learning how to work as part of a team.
Yeah, that's very important. Now we're getting to the end of this, but I had a final question, and that is regarding the freestyles for junior, young riders, and under 25. I think the quality has improved so much over the years. How do you see that evolving in the U.S.?
I think definitely you're right on. The quality keeps getting better and better. We have a number of very good professional freestyle choreographers and people doing the music for them, but some are doing them, you know, their own as well. But I think the technology that's out there for them to do it at home is vastly different from what it was 10 or 15 years ago. But I think the other thing, you know, in all of this, it's really important to keep in mind that the way that we learn, what we see, the world is so different from what it was with the internet, the exposure that we've been very fortunate to host the World Cup here a number of times in this country. That has had a huge impact. I think having the WAG here twice has had a huge impact. And just what happens in Wellington and Florida in the winter season. And when I say has a huge impact, you know, our riders, our youth are seeing either firsthand by going to these competitions, they're seeing the top riders in the world. But even if they're not going to the competitions, so much of it is available on the internet. And so they can see what the standard is in the rest of the world. And that is really crucial in motivating them.
Just one final question. I know I said the last one was the last one, but the freestyle was the last one. But do you teach abroad, or like if some of the countries that is watching now this would like to have you helping some of the riders, could you do that, or do you have exclusivity with the U.S.?
I have my contract is not. How do I want to say that? Let me back up on that one. You know, certainly at competitions, I have to be very focused on the U.S. teams. I always travel as a chef as well as the coach, and when we send youth teams, so there I'm very, very limited. But I think as far as just teaching in other countries, that can be very possible. I have, for a number of years, I went to Bermuda and helped with the Bermudians and their riders. So it is very possible, yes.
Yeah, because I think you have so much experience that, and then probably you could also help, you know, develop some programs for the kids, for the juniors, at a different level than what you have in the U.S.
Yeah.
So
it's important, so important to get our youth involved in the sport.
Yes, definitely. So some people is asking me if I can make the contact with you, and of course I will. I want to thank first you, George. This was very helpful. People were very interested. I had never had so many questions before. Okay. Thank you very much for your time and for all your very good answers. And thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. If some people have any more questions, you're welcome to post them, or if you want, I can open the microphones for you. Otherwise, I'm going to finish the recording.